and everybody sort of hangs out there in leather. I think that you're supposed to regard the position.
For nearly 3 decades, one woman ruled American daytime television with a single raised eyebrow. She didn't need a script, a co-host, or a laugh track. She needed a gavel, a black robe, and a willingness to tell perfect strangers exactly what she thought of their excuses. Judith Sheindlin, better known to the world as Judge Judy, became one of the most recognizable faces in television history, and one of the wealthiest women ever to sit behind a bench, real or fictional. But headlines love a twist, and lately plenty of them have leaned into the idea that somewhere behind the fortune and the fame, her life now looks lonelier, sadder, or smaller than it used to. So what's actually true? Is the woman who once told Supreme Court justices' approval rating that it couldn't touch hers really living a quiet, sad decline at 82? Or is the real story a little more complicated, and honestly a lot more interesting? Let's dig into how Judge Judy actually spends her days now, what her family looks like, what her health has been through, and what she's still building even after most people her age have long since stopped working. Stick around, because the answer isn't quite what the tabloids want you to believe. It's worth pausing on just how strange it is that anyone would frame her current chapter as sad in the first place. This is a woman who, by most reasonable measures, still has more going on at 82 than most people have in the middle of their careers. New shows, an intact multi-decade marriage, a sprawling family, and a net worth that would take most people several lifetimes to earn. If that's sad, it's a version of sad that a lot of people would happily sign up for. But headlines need tension, and tension sells better than contentment. So let's actually walk through what's real, what's exaggerated, and what's just flatly missing from the narrative these clickbait titles are trying to sell you. Long before she became a courtroom icon, she was just Judith Blum, a girl growing up in Brooklyn in a Jewish household shaped by German and Russian roots. Her father was a dentist, a man she has spoken about with real fondness over the years, describing him as endlessly supportive. Her mother worked as an office manager, and by Judy's own description, was a practical, no-frills kind of woman. It's not hard to see where some of that bluntness she'd later become famous for actually came from. She graduated high school in Brooklyn in 1961, then headed to American University in Washington, D.C., where she studied government, graduating in 1963. From there, she went straight into law school in New York, earning her degree in 1965, at a time when female law students were still a rarity. She has often pointed out that she was the only woman in her graduating class, a fact she doesn't say with self-pity, but with the kind of pride that comes from doing something the odds said you shouldn't be able to do. Her first job out of law school was as a corporate attorney for a cosmetics company. It paid the bills, but it didn't feed her. Within a couple of years, she left the job entirely to raise her 2 young children. It's a detail people tend to skip over when they talk about her legendary toughness. Before she was terrifying litigants on national television, she was a stay-at-home mother who eventually got restless, went back to work, and built an entirely new career for herself in her 30s. That new career started in family court. She took a job as a prosecutor in 1972, working cases involving child abuse, domestic violence, and juvenile crime, the kind of casework that doesn't leave much room for softness. A decade later, in 1982, New York City Mayor Ed Koch appointed her a criminal court judge, impressed by her directness. For years after that, she was elevated to supervising judge of Manhattan's Family Court Division. By the time reporters started paying attention to her, she'd already spent well over a decade in courtrooms that most people would find unbearably heavy, hearing more than 20,000 cases before her television career ever began. Her transformation from respected but relatively obscure family court judge to full-blown cultural phenomenon happened almost by accident. A 1993 newspaper profile caught the attention of producers, and not long after, a segment on a major television news magazine turned her into a recognizable face across the country. Audiences liked what they saw. Someone who didn't dance around the truth, didn't coddle people who were clearly lying, and delivered her opinions with the confidence of someone who had genuinely heard it all before. That national attention led to her first book in 1996, and the same year, she retired from the bench to do something almost nobody expected: star in her own reality courtroom show. It debuted in September of that year, built around real small claims, disputes, and unscripted rulings. She brought her real-life bailiff along with her, a partnership that would go on to last for decades and set records of its own for longevity in televised courtroom programming. What followed was one of the longest, most dominant runs in daytime television history. For years, her show pulled in millions of viewers every single day, at times outperforming even the biggest names in daytime programming. From roughly 2009 until the show ended, it held the position of the single most watched program in daytime television. A well-known analysis of the show's appeal, published while it was still near its peak, suggested that audiences weren't drawn in by legal nuance. They wanted the satisfaction of watching someone finally hold people accountable quickly and without procedural distractions getting in the way. That was the whole appeal. Justice, fast, with no patience for excuses. What made her different from most daytime television hosts wasn't just the ratings. It was how completely she seeped into the wider culture. She became a recurring reference point in sketch comedy and sitcoms, showed up in surveys as one of the more trusted public figures in American life, and was named to lists ranking the most significant pop culture icons of her era. One particularly telling poll from the early 2010s found that a notable share of Americans said they trusted her judgment more than they trusted the 9 sitting justices of the Supreme Court. Whether or not that says something about the court or something about her, it's a remarkable thing for a woman whose entire public persona was built on being blunt to the point of rudeness. She leaned into that visibility rather than shy away from it. She's turned up on major late-night programs, daytime talk shows, and long-form interview specials. And she famously walked out during a live sketch comedy broadcast that was poking fun at her, turning a joke at her expense into a moment that showed she could take a punch as easily as she threw one. She's had cameo appearances in television movies, served as a judge for a national beauty pageant, and sat for hours-long oral history interviews documenting her career for television archives. A cable comedy series even built an entire parody episode around her show, recreating the set, the music, and the rhythm of her rulings closely enough that it played almost like a genuine tribute. Beyond the on-camera cameos, she built out an entire production business of her own in the mid-2010s, founding a production company that gave her creative control over new formats rather than simply appearing in shows other people built for her. That company produced her panel format courtroom show featuring 3 arbitrators instead of 1, an idea she has said she picked up while watching a similar format overseas with her husband. It ran for years, consistently pulling respectable daytime audiences even while sitting in the shadow of her own far more dominant flagship program. She's also written several books over the years, mixing career reflections with blunt life advice aimed largely at women trying to balance ambition with everything else life throws at them. Those titles built on the success of her very first book from the mid-1990s, the one that helped launch her television career in the first place, and gave her a second, quieter income stream and a way to speak directly to fans without a network standing between them. Somewhere in between all of that television work, she carved out time for less flashy pursuits that rarely make headlines, but say a lot about how she's chosen to spend her later decades. Along with one of her stepdaughters, she co-founded a mentoring initiative aimed at helping young women build confidence and navigate career paths, particularly in fields where women have historically been underrepresented. It's a kind of low-visibility philanthropic work that doesn't generate tabloid attention, but it's been running for years and reflects a genuine interest in using her platform for something beyond her own paycheck. She's also funded a public debate forum at a major university, built around the idea that open, unfiltered argument, even uncomfortable argument, is healthier for a society than avoiding hard conversations altogether. That instinct tracks with everything else about her public persona. A belief that bluntness, even when it stings, tends to serve people better in the long run than politeness that avoids the truth. Awards have followed her into this phase of her career too. She's collected honorary doctorates, recognition from her law school alma mater, and honors from health and women's organizations celebrating her professional impact. None of that reads like a woman being quietly forgotten by the institutions and communities around her. If anything, it reads like someone still being actively courted for her opinion and her name. She's also waded into more overtly political territory at points, including public campaign appearances supporting candidates she believed in during presidential primary seasons. Whatever you think of the politics themselves, campaigning across the country in your late 70s and early 80s isn't the itinerary of someone slowing down or withdrawing from public life. It's the itinerary of someone who still very much wants to be heard. It's impossible to talk honestly about her life now without talking about the sheer scale of what she built financially. Her television salary climbed for years, eventually making her one of the highest-paid personalities in the entire entertainment industry, regardless of genre. Multiple financial outlets have pegged her fortune anywhere between roughly $300 million and well over $500 million depending on the year and the source, a wide range that reflects just how many revenue streams she had going at once. Her salary, her production company, and a hugely lucrative sale of the rights to her back catalog of episodes to the network that aired her show. That deal alone, selling the rights to thousands of episodes plus future ones, brought in around $100 million on its own. On top of the salary from her main show, she also earned steady income as a producer behind a second courtroom series featuring a panel of 3 judges instead of 1, an idea she has said she got from watching a similar format while traveling abroad with her husband. She has never pretended to be shy about defending that level of compensation. When people questioned whether any television host deserved that kind of paycheck, her answer was consistently blunt. Without her, there is no show, and the numbers over 25 years backed that argument up. It's a kind of confidence that made her a courtroom star in the first place, and it clearly never left her, even off camera. With that kind of income came real estate, and a lot of it. Reports over the years have placed her property portfolio, shared with her husband, somewhere in the neighborhood of $70 to $100 million. Her primary residence is a sprawling estate in Connecticut sitting on roughly 12.5 acres, complete with 10 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, a pool, and manicured grounds that reportedly cost the couple over $13 million when they purchased it. Beyond that main home, she has held properties in places like Naples, Florida, Newport, Rhode Island, and both New York City and Beverly Hills at various points, giving her a genuinely nationwide footprint of homes rather than a single fixed address. None of that reads like the profile of someone living in quiet, diminished circumstances. If anything, the financial picture is the opposite of sad. But money was never really the interesting part of her story. The more human question is what she actually does with her days, and who she does them with. Her personal life has been just as full of twists as her career, though far less publicly performed. Her first marriage came early, at 20 years old, to a young attorney. They had 2 children together and, for a while, tried the version of family life that was expected of most young couples in that era. A move out of the city, a quieter pace, a wife who stayed home. She has been honest that the arrangement didn't suit her. She went back to school for a further law degree, returned to the workforce, and eventually found that her husband never fully respected the career she'd built, treating it, in her words, more like a hobby than a real vocation. That mismatch wore the marriage down, and after 12 years together, they divorced. Her second marriage, to fellow attorney Jerry Scheindlin, started with a memorably unglamorous first encounter at a bar and turned into one of the more resilient partnerships in the industry. They married in the late 1970s, blended 2 families with 5 children total between them, and built a life that, by both of their accounts, wasn't always smooth but was durable. In 1990, following the death of her father, the marriage briefly buckled under the emotional weight of that loss and a communication breakdown between them. They divorced that same year, but the split didn't stick. Within roughly a year, they remarried, and by most public accounts, the second attempt at their marriage has lasted for decades since, weathering age, health scares, and the ordinary friction of a long life shared together. That family has only grown since. Between her 2 children and her husband's 3 from his prior marriage, the couple has 13 grandchildren, and more recently, great-grandchildren as well. Several of her children and stepchildren went into law themselves, an unsurprising outcome given the household they grew up in. One of her sons became a prosecutor and later a judge himself, eventually joining a courtroom show she created. A stepson built a career in law and opened his own firm, and a stepdaughter became a law firm partner. Not every child followed the same path. One of her daughters has largely stayed out of the public eye altogether, and a stepson chose medicine over law, becoming an eye doctor instead. That mix says something honest about the family. It isn't a single-minded legal assembly line. It's a large blended household where some kids followed in mom and dad's footsteps and others carved out entirely different lives, which is about as normal as families get, regardless of how much money is involved. Her granddaughter has even worked alongside her as a law clerk on her more recent television projects, which is a detail that undercuts the idea of a woman isolated from her own family. If anything, she has built something closer to a small legal dynasty, still actively involving the next generations in her work rather than watching from a distance. When she talks about her husband today, decades into their relationship, she tends to frame their bond less around romance in the traditional sense and more around mutual respect and understanding what the other person actually needs, a lesson, she said, took real time and more than one painful separation to learn properly. Both have spoken publicly about the importance of staying physically active and taking care of themselves as they've aged, treating it less as vanity and more as a kind of shared discipline that's kept their partnership feeling current rather than stale. It's worth sitting with how unusual that trajectory actually is. A lot of marriages that go through a formal divorce don't get a second chance, let alone a second chance that outlasts the first attempt by decades. Theirs did. Whatever hardship pushed them apart in 1990, whatever bruised pride kept them from immediately reconciling, they clearly found something on the other side of that separation worth holding onto for the long haul. It would be dishonest to pretend her later years have been entirely free of difficulty. In 2011, during a taping of her long-running show, she fainted on set and was rushed to the hospital. It was later reported that she had suffered a minor stroke. For a woman whose entire public identity was built on toughness and control, collapsing in front of a crew must have been frightening in a very private way. But by all available reporting, she recovered relatively quickly and returned to work, and the network extended her contract again shortly afterward rather than easing her into retirement. That's a genuinely notable data point. A health scare that, for many people, might prompt a slower, quieter final chapter instead became a footnote in a career that kept accelerating for another decade. When her original courtroom show finally ended in 2021 after 25 seasons, plenty of outlets treated it as the natural closing chapter of her career. It wasn't. Before the final episode had even aired, she had already announced a new streaming courtroom series, and production on it had begun months before her old show wrapped taping. That new show represented something genuinely unusual in her industry. The first major courtroom program to launch exclusively on a streaming platform rather than traditional cable or broadcast television. The new series came with a noticeably different tone. She traded her old robe for a different color, updated the set, and brought in fresh younger voices, including her own granddaughter, to keep the format feeling current. Longtime viewers noticed she was slower and less combative than the persona they remembered from decades of reruns, a small but telling sign that even someone this famously unyielding was willing to adjust her approach with age. Not every change was popular. Her longtime bailiff, a fixture of her original show for more than 2 decades, wasn't brought along to the new series. He has said publicly that he found out through indirect channels and felt confused by how quietly the decision was handled, though he has also said he holds no resentment and has since gone on to work on another courtroom project she created. It's a kind of awkward, very human transition that happens in long-running professional relationships, more bittersweet than scandalous. Despite not matching the same eye-popping ratings as reruns of her original show, the new streaming series still became one of the most watched programs on its platform in terms of total viewing hours, and it earned her a Daytime Emmy, making her the only television arbitrator ever to win that award for 2 entirely separate courtroom programs. That's not the resume of someone fading from relevance. It's the resume of someone who found a way to stay on top of an industry that has chewed up and discarded far younger television personalities.